veritable smorgasbord, a cornucopia of delights when you look at this infrastructure bill, this $1 trillion and counting infrastructure bill that looks as though it has a pretty good chance of passing. But the question is, has anybody that's voting on this bill even bothered to read it? Or, a la Nancy Pelosi, well, do we just have to pass the bill before we know what's in it? And how much of it has anything whatsoever to do with infrastructure? 6:39 now, 1310, KFKA 1031, Northern Colorado's Voice, Mornings with Gail from the Auto Collision Specialist Studios. So pleased to be joined once again by Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee. This is a 2.8 million member public policy organization. He also serves as president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. And I kind of love how you sum it up, Mark, and thanks again for taking the time. This massive infrastructure bill kind of looks like an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Well, it is, and you started out with that wonderful song from the Oliver show, yes, the play, and I was an orphan. At 10 years old, I was an orphan in a play at the Alfred State College in Western New York. I was one of the orphans, and I know that song by heart, and what the tagline there is, food, glorious food, all we ever get is gruel. And that's how this song goes, and that's what we're getting in this infrastructure bill. Taxpayers and citizens are getting gruel as certain constituencies are getting food, glorious food, and unfortunately, it's debt and tax dollars that are in play. And to your point, Gail, even the so-called bipartisan group of Republican senators that agreed to let this thing go through at $1.2 trillion, they state that, well, even though we talk about it not having a whole lot of infrastructure, they say that something like 50% is infrastructure, so the other 50% apparently is not. But it's really amazing, Gail, what's happening here in Washington, D.C., and we just got to keep our eyes open and pay attention to it, so thank you for bringing attention to it.
Well, and I am so glad that song resonated with you because you remember another line from the play, "May I have some more, sir?"
Yeah, and Mr. Bumble goes on a tirade about more.
Right.
Who asked for more? And then he says, we will throw him down a stairway, I remember all the songs. My brother, actually, my older brother, who got everything in life, and I was the baby in the family, he was Oliver Twist, so we had to sit through the entire rehearsal as opposed to just doing our opening scene of Food, Glorious Food.
Now, here's what's interesting. They say, move it along here. There's nothing to see. Don't worry about revenue generation. Don't worry about taxes. Don't worry about fees. No, it's not going to be a problem. But I have to wonder when you get into the guts of it, and I have to admit, no, I haven't read the whole thing because it is scintillating now, Mark, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the problem is, this according to a piece I pulled out of the Wall Street Journal, that just calls it for what it is. Bipartisan infrastructure deal raises taxes, calling it a targeted corporate user fee doesn't change the reality.
Yeah, it really has gotten perverse. And, when you think about a bill a so-called infrastructure bill that has a civilian climate core and it has, incentives for electric vehicles that basically only can go to unionized companies. When you buy a Tesla, you don't get any support because Elon Musk and his employees have yet to introduce and invite the United Auto Workers union officials into their place of manufacturing. And so, there's a whole lot of crony capitalism in here, and arguably, Gal, some bridges and roads need to be rebuilt, and there's money that needs to go into infrastructure. But this turns into being kind of one of those Christmas trees that we've heard so much about here in Washington, where they just load on every decoration that someone can think of. And frankly, this is just a link, and this is being uncovered now as you look at the details of the bill. It's linking it to the $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation that's coming in September.
Mm-hmm. Right, no question. All right, so here's a question. Did the Republicans simply roll over on this? But is there a method to their madness, Mark? Because it seems to me there is some hope that they might retake the Senate in 2022. I think it's going to be pretty darn close, and they're going to use inflation as a key indicator in spurring voters to vote Republican.
Well, if that's the only strategy they've got, that they've got to bust the middle class and make things more expensive so they can win politically, then it's suspect in my mind. You know, everyone talks about this fifth dimension chess or fourth dimension chess or fourth degree chess that they're playing. If there is, I'm not smart enough to understand it, because this is costing lots of money and it's lots of debt, and we're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, Gail. I mean, I don't understand what a trillion is anymore. I don't, but, you know, billions used to be pretty big, but that's just rounding errors now when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, that's the equivalent of chump change these days, right, Mark?
Yeah, indeed. And so we're talking about, you know, if the political strategy is to go into debt and spend more money and tax more citizens, then I'm not for that political advantage, if that's what they think it is. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, by moving to proceed to the bill, these Republican senators, the 18 of them that are on board with this, and we'll see how they vote. I think the vote's going to come today, Gail, later today, and it'll be interesting because some of those 18 that allowed Schumer to get to the bill, to bring it to the floor so they could put it up in front of the Senate, will probably vote against the bill, I would guess, because of the stuff that got larded on it and some of the stuff it's doing to cryptocurrency and other issues that are surrounding the infrastructure bill.
Isn't this the Green New Deal by any other name?
It sure is. There's lots of stuff in there about that, and the budget reconciliation will have that in there. And yeah, it really is amazing how they just basically think that we're not paying attention, and yet, while they put out 2,700-page bills that they don't read, you know, I like our National Right to Work Act, which is one page, doesn't add a single word to federal law. It simply says you get to choose whether or not you want to support a labor union, and you can't lose your job if you choose not to. I mean, one page, no new language. That's how we should be legislating, right?
Exactly. Something we can all wrap our heads around, to be sure. 645 now, Northern Colorado's Voice, 103.1, 1310 KFKA, joined by Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee. He also serves as president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. So no doubt that this is likely going to sail just right on through.
I think that's right. They've got the votes, and the vote is a simple majority vote now, Gail. So 50 votes. If they get the 50 Democrats and Vice President Harris to sit in the chair and vote, the way she's going to vote, then it passes 51-50. But I don't think it'll be that vote. It'll probably be, 60-40 or 55-45, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So, more tax and spending courtesy of the Democrats, but the Republicans are, and I find this concerning. How do you tell the difference when it comes to their spendy ways these days between a Democrat and a Republican?
Well, if this bill's the indicator in the case study, you can't. There are those that have said that, we can't afford it and we have to pay for it. And somehow they're making the claim that this is paid for, but it's not. It does raise taxes. People that have looked at it say that clearly. And, somehow they're using repurposed spending that they've already given to states and other entities for coronavirus, but they borrowed that money too. So somehow when you borrow money and then you repurpose it, it's not spending. I don't understand that either, but
I'm confused.
Yeah, we should be. Yeah.
All right, changing gears, asking you to put on your National Right to Work Committee and National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation hats. Found this absolutely fascinating, and I think we had the chance to talk about this case before involving that Colorado Springs metal worker winning a formal settlement in his case, charging the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, SMART, Local 9 union officials with imposing a retaliatory fine on him because he exercised his right to end his union membership and went on to work at a Pueblo facility outside, say it isn't so, of the union's control. And you actually did this case. You actually took this case pro bono, yeah?
Yeah, Gail, this is a fascinating story about how individual workers it's hard for them to stand up against this type of stuff. Our client came to us when he was fined $21,000, $21,252 to be exact, in disciplinary fines for quitting his job at one place and going to work for a non-union facility someplace else. And Gail, it's interesting because the fines were these internal union disciplinary fines, and they basically fined him into the future for the days that hadn't even passed on the calendar yet, which was kind of intriguing. Yeah, and the question that was left on the table after we exposed this with your help and others talking about the kind of the outrageousness of this, they let the fines go, but the question from the NLRB's perspective was, and what really got the settlement going, was whether or not this was retaliatory or whether it was just, quote, an accident that they fined him. They didn't, they made a mistake and fined him. And the NLRB investigated and said it was indeed retaliatory. So the union had to post a notice saying they will never do it again. It was kind of a slap on the wrist. But for our client, Russell Chacon, it was a victory. And for those that get to read about this and hear about it, it's also a victory for them because they have a better understanding of what their rights are in America's workplace when it comes to unions and their power over workers. And it was a good victory and one that we're happy to have partnered with Russell on to win.
An accidental fine. How creative is that?
Well, yeah, those two words shouldn't go together, but anyway, it really is kind of an interesting story, and one that's unfortunately it's not a one-off story, Gail. We're representing literally hundreds of clients and actually thousands of clients in hundreds of cases that have similar stories to this type of abuse and this type of privilege that union officials use and try to intimidate workers. And this is certainly intimidation. If you got a letter in the mail, and maybe you're better off than I think, Gail, but you said you owe me $21,000, what would you say?
Well, probably things that I can't say on the air, given that this is a family-friendly show.
Fair enough.
Hey, before I let you go, Mark, just wanted to ask you, this Delta variant is being, in my humble opinion, being exploited by the government in terms of maintaining power and control, not minimizing how contagious it is. And I know we're seeing hospitalizations on the rise, but with all of this turnaround, this reversal, it seems as though the new normal is going to be less of something that we had looked forward to than was the old normal when COVID-19 first hit our shores. What with the mask mandates, what they're doing to our kids in schools. Oh my gosh. You've got, the demand to vaccination. My gosh, the defense secretary is going to mandate the COVID vaccine for the military by September 15th. Are we headed, from a work perspective, in the right or the wrong direction?
Well, I'm taking off my professional hat and putting on my personal hat as a father of a kid who's still have two kids in college and one in high school, and those questions are relevant today. But, from our perspective here at Right to Work, putting back the Right to Work hat on, it's kind of interesting how union officials are responding to this. On one hand, you've got union officials saying, yeah, you got to mandate vaccinations in order for teachers to go back into classrooms. On the other hand, you got unions saying, look, we're going to stand up against mandated vaccines. So it's really, the public opinion on this is really interesting, and obviously it's really, getting back to my personal perspective, it's really an interesting debate. I don't understand the virology or all the science behind it, but I do know that for a government saying that you have to be injected with a chemical is kind of an interesting story and an interesting subject that I'm sure your listeners will be talking about today, I suspect.
There's a lot of pushback when it comes to that. Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee, president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. And I hope that you've already had some sustenance. If not, here's to getting some food, glorious food this morning.
Thanks, Gail. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Mark. Take good care. 6:52 now, 1310 KFKA.